Okay, so I'm going to be moderator for today's session. So Darren Flynn, so if you've got any questions that occur to you along the way, just send a private message to me and then I can pass those over to Sheila at the end of the session. So for this session, we have Sheila Webber, who's presenting on ageism and libraries. I want to particularly thank University of Sheffield Information School for sponsoring this event, and this is a sponsor slot that we've provided for the Information School as a thank you in order to express our thanks for sponsoring the conference. So if you're all ready to go, I'll pass on to you, Sheila.
Thank you, Darren. I'm just trying to get my correct screen shared, or I should be. Yes, this. Okay, so I think I'm sharing the right thing now. I have done a lot of online presenting, but it doesn't stop me being terrified and pressing the wrong button when I shouldn't do. So I'm going to be talking about ageism and libraries, and I'm just putting the webcam on to start with over this first slide, so you can see a glimpse of the living room and me. I also must apologise in that for this presentation, which I haven't presented on before, I collected far too much stuff, and for some reason in lockdown, I seem to find it really difficult to finish things. And so in the end, I had to send it off. And some of the slides have got too much stuff on them. But I am putting in text chat, and I apologize for that. I'm going to finish within time, but there are some of the slides where I'm not going to say very much about what's on there. I've put the references on a Google Doc, and also I've uploaded these presentation to SlideShare. So if you do get bored during this presentation, you can just look through the slides afterwards, and they'll be there available. So the in a number of places in the presentation, I'm using photos, what I call photos, taken in 3D virtual world, Second Life, where I'm very active. I've been active for 13 years, and currently I'm a lead organizer for a weekly international discussion group on education in Second Life. But I also, I'm addicted to it. I'm enchanted by it. And one of the things I really like about Second Life is that you can present yourself however you want. And so you can present yourself, well, I always have blue hair in Second Life, and I change my clothes, but I present as a human, and the one that's similar to me in the physical world, but not an exact physical representation. But people can represent themselves as dragons or cardboard boxes, and there's a very strong disability or ability movement in Second Life, where people can choose whether to represent themselves with the same physical disabilities as in the physical world, or not. It's up to them. And I find this aspect of virtual worlds liberating, in that you are not immediately pigeonholed when people take a look at you and assume, oh, that's an old person, they must be like that. That's someone in a wheelchair, they must be like that. And so that's to explain some of the pictures I'll be having here. So I'll stop sharing my webcam and go on to the first slide. So I'm going to be talking about ageism in general, ageism in a time of coronavirus, because it seems to me that some ageism has come to the surface, and then specifically about ageism in the workplace, and ageism and the users of libraries, people who want to use libraries. The key messages are that ageism is around, and it's often implicit when people don't think they're ageist, that it's present in the workplace, and that it can be perceived in the services that are provided to library users. So those are the key messages summing up. But what I've done is, I haven't looked, and there are good examples, I haven't looked at examples from libraries doing excellent things to meet the needs of people of different age groups. I've looked more at the literature. I haven't done a systematic review, but I have looked at library literature and some other literatures like the management literature. And ageism can affect people of any age, but I'm focusing on ageism and older people because it's my experience at the moment as an older person. So I'm 67, and so by any classification I qualify as an older person. And I've already put in the so I'll do it again in a moment for people arriving later. The references in a Google Doc, and that this presentation is already on SlideShare. And the pictures are by me, where I don't cite anyone else. So the triggers for me becoming more aware of ageism are partly me becoming older. So that's my out-of-date senior rail card. I suddenly realize it's gone out of date while I'm in isolation. And also my mother, who died when she was 91 a few years ago, seeing what her life was, what it was reduced to be honest, in her final few years, brings it very starkly into awareness for me that I'm within shouting distance of that kind of experience, because people do become more frail as they get older, and it's then you feel like more and more you're going to be a victim of people's stereotypes about what you're like at that age. Bill Johnston, who I've worked with for ages on information literacy, is an activist in the older people's movement in Scotland. He's been chair of the Older People's Scottish Assembly. And this is an article he wrote a couple of weeks ago for a radical website called Common Weal, a shielded cage, meaning that's what old people, that's what the threat is to put people into during the coronavirus. And finally, another trigger has been the media and information literacy events. I've got involved in UNESCO's initiatives to do with media and information literacy, and gone to more media literacy events where the focus is very much on young people, which is great, but it seems to be almost entirely on young people, ignoring the media and information literacy of adults. And I've become aware, particularly older people, where it seems to still be okay to make casually ageist remarks about their abilities to handle information. And I put there an indication of kind of the events that are organized for young people, lots of them. They're really exciting, they're challenging, stimulating, developing young people. And the ones aimed at older people are frankly dull and assume a deficit model of older people, that you need to help the poor old dears to get in contact with their grandchildren, that kind of thing. My own positionality is that I'm a baby boomer, female, white, English. I'm a principal wage earner, married, with no children, and everyone has their own history. I was first in family to university, so both my parents left school at 14 because it was expected that you left school as soon as possible and started earning money in both their families. So I was first from either side. I went to university at a time when there had just been the revolution, the students occupying buildings. I was at the University of Kent, which was a new university at that time, and the students have been very radical, occupying buildings. And also the things with crosses through are not indicating that I did not eat or drink while at university. It's that while I was at university, for example, it was really weird to think that you'd pay money for bottles of water because it came out of the tap. So it's a kind of cycle that's gone on there. And we had the first hamburger restaurant in Canterbury, which is where the university was, arrived during my time at university, and it was a real thing. It wasn't McDonald's. McDonald's hadn't kind of penetrated the UK at that point. So there was it was a different social, economic environment. But just as you know, everyone has their own background, and you can't make assumptions about where they came from by where they are now. And another thing I thought I'd identify here was that reading through this particular article, which is a really good article, and when I came across it, I was really excited to read it. But also by the end of it, I realized that the authors, who position themselves as one a millennial and one in the border between millennial Generation X, had read some of the same articles and got different things out of them. I'd seen the narratives about discrimination against age, and also other narratives because, for example, there's a huge amount of rubbish written about millennials and their characteristics, I think in particular. but they had focused in on those without, and they made their position clear, but they hadn't explicitly said this is the scope of the article. And it seemed to me they were perhaps missing some of the ageist stuff to do with older people. And I initially hadn't paid enough attention to the stuff to do with millennials. So although I think the authors of this article and I were both aiming to take a critical perspective, it's so easy to fall back and see your own concerns mirrored in something. So ageism, it's the stereotyping of prejudice or discrimination against individuals or groups based on their age. And so with those three highlighted words, the stereotyping is the cognitive aspect of forming this picture in your mind, constructing it. The affective is the emotion that can be prejudice, and the behavior is the discrimination, which is putting your feelings and your stereotypes kind of into action against individuals or groups. And the second part of this definition is highlighting that it's structural, and it can occur with individuals, it can be institutionalized, and also it can be embedded in particular nationalities, cultures, communities. And so you're fighting it at all those levels. And obviously, as with all types of stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination. Now, this is where I'm aiming to have a poll, but I'd forgotten that what you're supposed to put is A and B. So I'm just seeing whether, yes, so basically 1 equals A. I'm going to initiate a poll of A and B. And A is 1, B is 2. I'm awfully sorry that... And also, if you have any examples of strategies and actions that combat ageism for people of either age, either relating to the library workforce or users of libraries, you can either put them in chat or in the shared notes. Darren was saying that sometimes the shared notes can be problematic, but it would be interesting to have a record afterwards. So if there's things that where you experienced ageism, and at the moment you've got 45% of people having experienced some form of ageism. Also, if you want to say anything more about that in the public chat, then do, because it would be interesting to hear what ages and what examples. So please put that in, and I'll talk to Darren afterwards about if anyone's happy to have some of that captured as a record afterwards. So I'll go on for now. So in terms of ageism, this was identified in a European survey as the most frequently mentioned type of discrimination. And therefore it isn't a minor issue. I should say also that the status of elders and stereotypes will vary depending on the culture or the country or the religion. It's, again, not something you can generalize about. And also, I'm very aware that in some cultures, elders may have power just through their age, regardless of their position in a hierarchy. I think in the UK, it's certainly the case that an old person doesn't automatically have power and respect just because of their age. It does vary depending on the community. But in others, the elders may have more of a stranglehold and be genuinely more of a problem with the ageism against predominantly young people suppressing their ideas. So again, I'm aware that things are different in different countries. The top quotation is from a literature review done for the Centre for Aging Better, which identified, as you see here, that older people are more likely to be portrayed as senile, ugly, stupid, unskilled, unproductive, unhealthy, and so forth. And the parcel there, which I also had in my slide about positionality, was just a moment for me a few years ago. Actually, it was in the aftermath of my mother dying, and I was so I was probably in a bit more of a state than usual, being at a post office counter, and I'd forgotten to put the address on a parcel or something like that. And I suddenly felt that I was being treated like a stupid old woman. And I have no evidence for that. I didn't interrogate the woman who was being very impatient, but it was just something in her manner that I thought, actually, this is a switch. And as I said, I can't prove it, but those of you who've suffered kind of discrimination will know that there's a moment where you were, yes, I'm not being paranoid. suddenly I'm being pigeonholed as someone who didn't do this because they're just useless and old. Against this stereotype of the deficient older person is the stereotype of someone looking like this, a successful age, a slim, fit, with the right kind of haircut, just the right amount of makeup, kind of very active, which I think is equally not good. And finally, in terms of the ageism, something I noticed very recently was that UNESCO had put out a series of bookmarks to publicise World Book Day on the 23rd of April. And they chose different faces, a variety of faces. And the one they chose for being alone and lonely is an old person. Whereas, as this statement, which the British Gerontology Society put out in response to the government's statements about old people and coronavirus, it was pointing out in different ways how older people were part of the community, but also that there were these stereotypes that were being used by various people speaking on behalf of the government and official agencies, still representing older people as these pathetic, lonely people, whereas the research shows that loneliness is experienced by all kinds of people. But I thought it's a bit depressing that UNESCO, which is fighting to stop media stereotypes, was actually using a stereotype in this occasion, and it's very easy to slip into this kind of stereotype. And this is another extract from the literature review, which again had gone through the research, various bits of research, asking people to say what words they associate with older people and identifying these positive and negative stereotypes, which you could spend a lot of time discussing in themselves. Some of the things on the positive side might not always be seen as positive, and vice versa. So I said that ageism had been brought particularly into focus for me by the coronavirus, and this is me in Second Life with a mask on, which happily in Second Life we don't have to have social distancing, but people are designing items referencing coronavirus, and it's something that obviously gets discussed as well. You may be familiar with the hashtag #OKBoomer. As a boomer, I don't find this okay. If you replaced boomer with any other protected characteristic, I think people who are using it at the moment, who I've seen using it, would feel very guilty, but apparently it's okay to say okay boomer. And as usual in these circumstances, this can tip over into boomer removal, i.e. thanks to the coronavirus, we'll get rid of all these awful baby boomers. And some of these other quotations may also be familiar to you. The one about they've had their time, and these are referenced in the Google Doc. The one about they've had their time was from a radio program, a radio debate about whether if there was a respirator and a limited number of respirators and an old person on it, should they be taken off to make way for a younger person? And the majority was of the people discussing it was yes, and someone did actually say these older people, they've had their time, so you can take them off the respirator. Also, another quote from the literature review, within family relationships, benevolently ageist language that emphasizes care and concern, which fits with an old age stereotype of incompetence, can encourage dependency and discourage more active aging behaviors. Certainly that is something for perfectly understandable reasons, which has emerged with the coronavirus. And an example from someone I heard on the radio talking about how they probably wouldn't have locked themselves down so thoroughly as they would have, but there was pressure from their family, which again is perfectly understandable, but it is also infantilizing and emotionally blackmailing older people to be in the cage, imprisoned, which is what, as an older person, it feels like the government's been advocating. Let's lock up all the older people so that the younger people can have normal lives. Also, I get very irritated by persistent and including in an umbrella conference, the Keynote to Silic Umbrella Conference, at various media literacy conferences, people feeling it's okay to stereotype older people as being useless with social media. And this was a quotation from, and I'm not sure whether you can see the bottom, it might be just as I present, I have it covered up, but it was from the news quiz a couple of weeks ago when they were talking about contact tracking. and making a non-joke about how everyone over 40 is useless at social apps. So I'm also now going to move on to the workforce, and starting with some general things about ageism and working, and then go on to talk specifically about libraries. And this is me at an education conference in Second Life. So basically, the message of this slide, which I'll pass over quickly and you can follow up on this if you're interested, is that older people are active in the paid workforce and in the unpaid workforce, and increasingly so. But older people as active in the workforce is seen as a problem. And there's a theme in the library literature of young, ambitious librarians being held up by these outdated old people who won't learn and who just won't go. And I had a quotation there from an article which summarizes results from a survey of New Zealand librarians. The participants raised concerns about the difficulties of encouraging older staff who've not kept up to date with changes and are not prepared to move out of their comfort zone to update their skills or exit the profession, which is obviously what they ought to be doing. And there's also a theme of older people discriminating against younger people, ignoring their ideas, stereotyping younger people, and insulting younger people. And what I would say that obviously there are older people who are doing this, but there's a lot more about that type of discrimination, of the discrimination by the old against the young, than there is the other way round, from reading it from my older perspective. And it's not that the discrimination by older people should not be called out. It's that I think all age discrimination should be called out. There's an issue of conflating age with a place in hierarchy, assuming all older people in workplaces have a position of power, whereas some older people are not in positions of power, in particular if they haven't followed the expected timeline. Like, as you get older, you're expected to move out the hierarchy. Some people haven't had the opportunity, some people don't want to, and they may be suffering ageism in that they might be seen as being out of place. Why, there must be something wrong with that person because they're 60 and they're still at this level. And additionally, possibly being seen as more powerful than they are, paradoxically. And of course, workplace discrimination is intersectional, and so I've referred there to the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, where the report I've cited, the latest one of their reports, has a section which looks at workplace discrimination and the intersectionality of discrimination in that context. And of that, as I'm a woman, I've picked out some of the research to do with discrimination against women. A quotation from an interview in a Finnish study, not librarians specifically. Old male grey eminence is looked at in a different way than an old grey woman. And the Finnish study was compared with the Scottish study in the second quotation I've got there, where it seemed from the testimony of the interviewees that there was this really small period of time where you were seen to have the opportunities. Younger than that, there were assumptions made about childbearing, on that you had to look pretty and things like that. And for older people, they were starting to be written off as old women. Also, I would mention this last study, which was carried out in Ghana, looking at the careers and perceptions of ability to progress of women librarians in Ghanaian universities. And they had particularly strong cultural expectations that, as if you were a woman, you must marry and have children, and that was holding them back as well in terms of people's expectations of what they would do at that point. And when they got older and perhaps had more time, they weren't being given the opportunities. They weren't being given mentors. There were expectations that they wouldn't have any ambitions. In terms of aspects of workplace ageism, there are attitudes, behaviors, practices, and policies that will affect people. And these will vary by different factors. They vary by sector. Like in the IT sector, everyone's expected to be younger. Also, a number of the research studies identify that even when people think they aren't being discriminatory, and again, this comes up in all kinds of discriminatory behaviour, it turns out that they are. And so I've cited there a study which gave people CVs with different aged photographs on them, and the participants tended to rate the CVs more highly when the people looked young. So in this last couple of slides on this section, there are various work practices that you can review, age-blind practices, discussing explicitly issues such as communications, working styles and transitions, where there may be differences in needs and preferences, and taking these seriously, and also taking CPD seriously, continuing professional development, taking different learning styles into account, catering for different approaches which might be appropriate at different age stages and people's different responsibilities. And remembering that just because powerful people in an organization, some of them may be older, it doesn't mean that all older people are powerful. And recognizing and challenging the implicit stereotypes, which might manifest themselves in the pictures that are chosen for recruitment brochures or to represent good performing, high performing staff. Are they always younger people? I mean, so it's another issue to take into account. And also, I think in trying to stamp out the old type of librarian stereotypes, is there a risk of creating new ageist ones where you choose not to portray older women, for example, because they were seen as part of the old stereotype? So finally, ageism and the people using libraries. I've drawn on a few studies in particular that were looking at public library practice. So this is one in the US, an ethnographic study, where Lenstra is highlighting that the services that were available for older people they frame them as older adulthood as a time of disability and decline, whereas you may have older people interested in anime and computer gaming. And some of the events that people put on might say more about the people providing them and their own stereotypes. So the American Library Association has 20 ideas for the 21st century, admittedly 14 years ago, but it includes having a show of wedding fashions from the 30s and 40s. Whereas if you think how old people would have had to be even in 2006, that is very old people and doesn't include a lot of older people. And Nicole Dalma, who has written an interesting paper about libraries and looking at it from a critical gerontology perspective, she has survey of some Canadian library programs, identified they were fairly traditional and did not appear to address older adults as composites of diverse ethnicities, sexual orientations, family arrangements, religious affiliations, and so forth. So in this area, there are things that can be done about spaces. So there are actually guidelines for age-friendly environments, which include information environments. There's issues of physical and virtual accessibility, and universal design principles, as always, will help all users if you look at them. And also Lenstra suggested dedicated spaces in larger libraries for older people where they can feel comfortable, and there are usually designated places for younger people where they can feel safe and have their interests served and be comfortable, and perhaps that one should be thinking of different age groups as well. In terms of events, aiming them at all ages and not assuming that, for example, gaming nights are only of interest to younger people. And when you arrange intergenerational events, not see them as, oh, let's bring in the young people to cheer up the sad old people. Also identifying that you might arrange things for older people, but not badge them as such, because some people might not want to see themselves as older people, and listen to their needs without preconceptions. So this is another study that was done and identified how a need arose that the older people wanted to know about online dating programs and how an older person could engage with an online dating program. So again, not making assumptions that people's sex lives are over just because they're older. And from Lenstra, an example of listening and engaging with people in their activities and seeing opportunities to support them. So also involving the older people to teach older people, so you have peer support, and librarians and volunteers learning from older people. And in all of these cases, essentially thinking not what age is the person, but who is the person, what do they have that they could bring, and how can we learn from that? I'd say that most articles do not address ageism and tertiary education. I'm not going to go into any further in that, but as I'm reaching the end of the presentation, but my observation from talking to master students, PhD students, and older undergraduates is fits in with my own observation that services and messages from universities are very geared towards students, almost totally geared to them, to late teens and early 20s. And I've heard individual anecdotal testimonies from students about how they feel excluded because they don't feel services are being provided for them. And even when one protests about this, I don't think universities take this exclusion very seriously. And on a more capitalist note, one of the articles identified that forming associations with older people can be beneficial in that they might leave you money in their wills. Actually, cynically, universities might be motivated by that more than altruistic ones. So obviously strategies are connecting with older people's organisations, i.e. ones run by older people, not something like Age UK, but actually, is there an activist group in your community? What are the ones that you can connect with? Could you bring them in to advise and represent? And sometimes someone's age, including people of saying someone is older who is on a committee or an advisory group, just having an older person doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be speaking as an older person. They may feel that they're representing some other expert group, for example. And so you still also have to think about allowing people, making it permissible to give your voice as an older person. And looking at examples and not just Western examples from other countries. So to finish, a statement again from the British Gerontology Society communication to the government about coronavirus. People of all ages are privileged with the same rights, and policies need to be applied at population level. Ageism, the stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination against people on the basis of their age has detrimental consequences for societies and individuals. And just to say the polling, it ended up as 52% saying they'd experienced ageism. I haven't been looking at the public chat, and I'll just put those again are the links to the references and the slides. And thank you for attending this presentation. I'm sorry I'm a couple of minutes over the time.
Thank you, Sheila. That was brilliant. And expertly presented as well, if I can add. I think we've got time for maybe just one question. I've had one through from one of our attendees who would like to know what your opinion on is, do you think descriptors like new professional or mid-career are helpful in sidestepping ageism, or do we actually just read them as meaning young for new professional and middle-aged for mid-career?
I think in themselves they don't, but the trouble is that they can be read like that. It's an interesting thing with new professional. I hadn't thought of that critically myself, and there's no reason why a 60-year-old, because for example on our librarianship programs we have I think there's someone at the moment actually who's certainly in their 50s. But we do have older people. They will be a new professional because before they were doing other things, they were in a different profession. But it might seem a bit awkward to be in that grouping. I think that there is this assumption. I've encountered it in academia because I came in from being an information professional, and I still haven't got a PhD. So I certainly didn't go through the normal career path, and so I actually missed out on the early career advantages. And now I'm old. It's somehow expected that if you're any good, you would have become a professor, so you can't have ambitions. So it's not said explicitly, but all the schemes are kind of like focused that way. And I think it is worth thinking through that you don't necessarily have to change the label because early career, mid-career might be the same, but thinking about how you present that. yeah, I think it's something that is worth thinking about for CILIP.
Thank you very much, Sheila. So I think we'll draw this session to a close. If we could all just say thank you in the public chat just for Sheila for giving over her time and her expertise to share her thoughts and her research with us. It was really great. Shared notes section is absolutely full of people's experiences and strategies for dealing with ageism. So I'll definitely make sure that gets shared with everybody afterwards, because there's some really, really good insight in there. And thank you very much, Sheila. So next sessions are at 11:30. We've got a session on a Read at Leicester programme. That's one where Hina, unfortunately, is too ill to present live, but has done a recording for us. So if you just go into that session as normal, we'll give you the link to that. And we have another session from Sarah around one subdivision at a time, which is around cataloguing. Thank you very much, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that.